Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend the state of Israel. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in to this briefing. It's a great pleasure today to be joined once again by Danny Seaman, who is going to share his expertise and, more importantly, perhaps his passion about everything that is happening right now in Israel. Danny, it's good to see you.
Good to be here again. Very happy to. Thanks, Moshe.
So, Danny, why don't we start off with just a quick update on what is happening right now in this war?
Well, fortunately today, nothing out of the usual happening because I'm not a military expert. I'm not with a military background. Just to update on the situation, the operation in Gaza continues in the Rafah area, but also in areas that were Israel removed some of its troops. You got a wonderful briefing yesterday from Amir Avivi, and I stress General Amir Avivi. So he has more of the military expertise, and there were a lot of issues that required the input. So today, the operation continues as is. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Same thing with the north of Israel. Just half an hour ago, Hezbollah again fired in the direction of the north of Israel. They're firing in the direction of military installations, but also at areas that Israeli citizens were withdrawn from. People tend to forget that we have over 100,000 people from the north of Israel who have been displaced since October 7th and still have not gone home. Same thing, we had over 100,000 in the south of Israel. About 80% of them have been returned home and already have faced missiles being fired in the direction the past week. Today, there were no such incidents. Also, operations continue in Judea and Samaria with the IDF operating there against terrorist infrastructures and terrorist groups. So all three-front battle continues here, and it will go on. That's the major military news for today.
Thank you, Danny. We didn't speak yet on these briefings about the ICC. And General Avivi, yesterday we had so much to cover in terms of the war cabinet, we didn't get to the ICC. So let's spend some time right now on what the ICC is doing, Israel's reaction, and reactions coming out of Europe. What are your thoughts?
First off, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, doesn't have jurisdiction around the world, only to those member states. Israel is not a member state. I'm not a legal expert, so I can't go into the details of it and the aspects of it, but they don't have the jurisdiction, but they can create, through member countries, can create difficulties for Israel. I just want to state that if I look at it from the political aspect of things that I've been involved with over the years, this is the first time that a democratic country has been charged. We haven't been charged yet, but there have been accusations brought against us. This still has to go to, from my understanding, to a panel of the court itself to make a decision. This was the recommendation by their prosecutor. Now, I'm going to be very clear about this. The prosecutor is a Muslim from England. So this is not surprising that this person with his Muslim Islamic background and his animosity towards Israel would do something that has never been done before. And just so people understand, if this is done against Israel now, anything done against Israel will eventually find its way against other democratic countries. Israel is the same country that in the United Nations is singled out and has been singled out for years now in an extraordinary fashion by the United Nations in decisions against the state of Israel. Like the 190 some countries of the United Nations, you have against countries such as Cuba, Libya, Syria, Iran, terrorist organizations. All these things have here and there some decisions against them. Israel has every UN meeting, dozens of decisions against it. So already we see there's an imbalance against Israel. Now joining in on this is what's supposed to be the legal aspect, which is supposed to be based on laws and supposed to be fair and balanced. Here, once again, we see neither fair nor balanced, and especially when it comes to Israel, which is the embodiment of the Jewish existence in the world, the embodiment of the international Jew. This is nothing that we've not experienced throughout history. The singling out of Jews and the selective application of laws, the same thing is now happening with Israel. And this is beyond despicable. This is something that you should expect. And here I give credit to the President of the United States, who was critical about this decision. But we're already seeing countries such as France, which, oh, wow, big surprise. France, who succumbed to the Nazis back 80 years ago, again, find themselves giving in to extremist elements and saying that they warned Israel about its behavior. I would like to give a little background because nothing happening right now is a surprise to us here in Israel. It's been 10 years since I've been with government, but I can tell you very simply that even back then, it's been over 20 years since we withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Every few months, it could be a year and a half at the most, and you can look at this and look it up. Every few months, we had another operation in Gaza. Now, when we were planning for this within government, especially in I call it the battle over public opinion or the cognitive warfare, we knew we had a battlefield there as well. So when we knew Israel was going, and we knew it would be several months before we had to go in again at some point or another, because they consistently fired in the direction of Israel. There would be ceasefires. Everybody's calling for a ceasefire now. But there were continuous ceasefires when it came that were offered by the international community, sometimes the United Nations, in the reference to Lebanon, but usually the United States or Arab countries got involved with the conflict in Gaza, and Israel would eventually restrain itself and refrain from going in. And there was a lot of criticism about this in Israel, especially from the citizens in the South. I can speak to this regarding my family who live there, friends, family, people that I know from Ashkelon area. The people of Israel, just like as you're seeing right now, during every one of these operations over the years, would be very clear. They want the government to end this. They don't want their families growing up with this threat and with this continue being held hostage every year by missiles being fired in our direction. I've said this before, no country in the world would tolerate one missile being fired in its direction. We've taken tens of thousands of missiles over 20 years, and yet we're expected to restrain ourselves and refrain from doing everything possible to stop this. So why didn't we go into Gaza? And the government sometimes suffered from this because the public were very unhappy of the government not doing and finishing the job. Well, within the government, we knew several things. We knew that we had a stop clock, or if you want to call it a sand clock, ticking. And we knew that if we go into Gaza or we respond to an attack against Israel, it's a matter of days, literally days. We would expect 4 days before the international community, who initially would support Israel, sounds familiar what happened here in the first week after the 7th of October. They would support us, but then gradually they would start putting pressure on Israel to refrain, to restrain itself, to stop the actions. Citizens are being affected. Just as we knew this within government, you can be sure, and you're seeing it right now, that the Hamas, that the other terrorist organizations, the PLO, they all knew this as well. And they all knew that they can go smack us in the head and then hide behind a tree or something, and eventually somebody would come out and tell us to behave ourselves and restrain ourselves. So we knew we had about 4 days in which we can do this. Maybe we'd drag it in for another week. The longest we could have, and you'll see, the longest was 2 weeks in which Israel operated against the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And by 3 weeks, we had to stop the operation and go back to square one, where we were promised that this won't happen again. Our own military told us that, oh, now we took out this and that of the Hamas, and they won't be able to do this again. None of these things we see eventually worked. The thing we feared the most happened on the 7th of October, that they surprised us and caused tremendous damage, as we saw, and it's beyond terrorism. This was beyond anything we experienced, and it's since obviously the Holocaust, but any pogrom the Jews experienced over history, this is above and beyond any of those things. So this is a unique activity which allowed us to go in and do things, because suddenly, not only abroad, also elements inside of Israel understood that we can no longer tolerate this. It is no longer an issue of restraining Hamas or stopping it. It is an existential issue for the state of Israel. And I mention this because I was watching Amir yesterday, and he spoke about what is going on here politically. and I need to make it and stress this point to those who are viewing right now. The absolute majority of the public in Israel want this thing to be over, meaning over by getting rid of Hamas. We are in an existential moment for the state of Israel, not only because of Hamas, but because of Hezbollah, because of Iran, but also because the Middle East are watching and seeing. And for them, up until now, it is a huge victory, regardless of whatever is happening in the Gaza Strip, regardless of all the damage that is going on, everything that is happening there. For them, it's a huge victory that they intend to copy again in the future, unless we send a very strict message to them right now. Now, we're doing all of this while at the same time restraining ourselves, holding back. Briefings that were given here by the IDSF in the past have addressed the issue that American military experts have said that this is beyond comparable to anything that Western powers have done in their fighting against terrorist elements in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And just to mention the French, the battles that they're conducting right now in Africa, for example, none of these things did they show the same restraint that they're now demanding so hypocritically of the state of Israel. So yes, it is a problem that we were anticipating in the past, but right now, it's not the same situation, regardless of what they think. The same thing goes for elements inside of Israel who are behaving absolutely irresponsibly by trying to put either a limit on the extent of this battle or trying to make Israel stop the battle before we achieve the two main goals. One, and first and foremost, annihilating Hamas, and second, releasing and freeing our prisoners and our hostages.
Danny, thank you for sharing all of that. I want to ask you a more pointed question about the reactions to the ICC. You know, there's the old joke that here in Israel, there's, let's say, 7 million Jews and there's 7 million prime ministers, right? Everyone thinks they know how to run the country. Everyone thinks they know how to run the war. The ICC interests in arresting the prime minister, the minister of defense, elicited very strong reactions from the Knesset. 106 Knesset members came together and agreed to condemn that decision. And likewise, President Biden called the decision outrageous. And could you view these two events as potentially being a silver lining of what the ICC did, and maybe give the Israeli population a sense of something to come around and to jointly fight against, as opposed to fighting with each other?
Well, we already have something that we're fighting against, as I said, and I stressed before, and I think Amir referred to this yesterday. The absolute majority of Israelis, minus those who are extreme left-wing, who don't want and don't see the existence of a state of Israel necessary. And it's not only Arab citizens of Israel. Unfortunately, it's some extreme left-wing Jewish Israelis. But there's also an element of irresponsible politicians here who, I have to say, are being influenced and pressured by the United States, and for some reason believe in, and here's something I think that the best thing that could have happened to us was the position of the United States in the recent weeks, that a lot of Israelis who felt that we have to always give in to American pressure now understand that the United States, yes, is an ally of Israel and supportive, but the United States, first and foremost, like any country, will do what it's in its own self-interest or how they perceive it. I personally believe that it's in the self-interest of the United States to not only support Israel, but to understand that the threat against Israel is only because we're closest to the jihadists. And that threat against Israel is directed against the West and against the United States. The Iranians said very clearly, there's the great Satan and the little Satan. We're the little Satan. The great Satan is the United States. So the United States, for some reason, and this Americans are going to have to address that, think that by pressuring Israel or having us not win this war, it in somehow will benefit American interests. I can tell you very clearly it won't, but it certainly won't address our interests. So Israelis have to understand, with all due respect to the United States, with all our gratitude, and especially our gratitude to the American people, our government and our country has to do what is in our interest, because it's a question of our survival. And with all due respect to the international community, I'd rather they have less days of commemorating Jews and less Holocaust memorial days. And if they want to be angry with us and feel that we're violating whatever standards they do not uphold themselves, so be it. we have to take care of the fact that we have to preserve life for our children here. And if they don't understand it, it's not our problem. So here in Israel right now, the ICC, yes, it's making us understand that the war is not only over, but the ramifications of this that are far-reaching, and that all the, how can I say it very simply, all the anti-Semites who have been quiet for 80 years because they felt like they sort of exaggerated during the Holocaust, they're all popping up right now and making it clear two things for us: who we're dealing with and why we need the state of Israel.
Let's jump, if we can, to another news item, which we just did not have the time to get to yesterday, which was the death of the Iranian president. General Avivi made it clear that this wasn't really a major issue in terms of the war in Gaza, but I'm curious about your thoughts about, let's say, how the U.S. State Department responded in terms of supporting the Iranian people. What do you think about that?
If he was supporting the Iranian people, he'd be celebrating just like many of the Iranian people are doing right now. And that is why the situation here is it's sick. If the Western, and you have the United Nations, the Security Council, the EU, you have Britain, you have France, all of them sending out messages. This guy was a ruthless murderer. He murdered of over 30,000 of his own people. What has happened to the world right now that their moral compass is so perverted, Now, you can exaggerate and say, well, no wonder these people were visiting some island, infamous island that we all heard about. So we shouldn't be surprised that this is who the Western leaders, to a large degree, are. But unfortunately, these leaders are supported by the warped and perverted media in the West. And we mentioned before the book that I wrote that I wanted it to be called The Cradle of Fake News. We ended up calling it Israel and the Foreign Media because the violations of the principles and standards of Western journalism started with the perversion of their coverage of events here. By supporting PLO, now you can support Palestinians if you want, but why does it have to be the support of terrorist elements, of ruthless, brutal people who kill their own people, just like they're doing now with Hamas? And a lot of this was the media. So don't be surprised that campuses and children being brainwashed on campuses follow the same line when the media themselves, who should be more educated and more responsible, violated this as well. So all of this is, I think when history looks back at this time, when they understand what led to an eventual world war, they're going to look at this time and understand that our moral values and the deterioration of them as we see it right now is precisely what is behind that. It is a battle of good versus evil. Good, with all due respect, are those Jewish and Christian values. And this is what the Jewish people gave to the world. And therefore, those who stand with Israel, as it was through history, will stand on the side of rightness and the side of light.
Thank you to all of our viewers who are sending in questions in the chat and who are emailing and messaging them to me. It's great. And we try to get to as many questions as we can. And if we don't get to your question today, stay tuned for future programs. And for anyone who's sending in questions about what's happening in the north and Hezbollah, we're going to actually spend a whole day on that on Thursday. So we won't discuss that now. Come back on Thursday. It's a teaser for then. Danny, some of our viewers are writing in about the AP equipment that was seized by Israel, and likewise the shutting down of Al Jazeera. I think the last time you were on a briefing, you spoke about how Al Jazeera was going to be shut down. And I think now Al Jazeera has been shut down. You are a media expert and professional. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not familiar with the incident with AP. What happened there?
So I don't know all the details either. So let's focus on the Al Jazeera in terms of Israel shutting it down.
Al Jazeera was something being planned for a while. I am not too pleased about it, not because Al Jazeera shouldn't be shut down. Now, Al Jazeera is not a media organization. There is much a media organization as the PLO are diplomats, just because they wear a suit. The fact that they have a vest, Al Jazeera, that says press on it, and the fact that they get press credentials by the international community, we've already seen that many of its institutions are warped and unfortunately morally corrupt, doesn't make them journalists. They are the propaganda branch of the Islamic Jihad and being financed, unfortunately, by an ally of the United States, Qatar. Qatar fully support the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood are not there for Arab rights or for ending Western colonialism. They're there to promote Islamic supremacy. And they say it very clearly. They don't hide a thing. Everything that they've been saying, they try to do. So you have to take this into account. The same thing with the Muslim Brotherhood. They want to do to the West what they're doing to Israel right now. So Al Jazeera is their propaganda branch, and therefore they should be shut down in Israel. Now, the reason I'm not happy with the legal aspect of it here in Israel is because Israel is a democratic country. Al Jazeera you can shut them down, but anybody with a camera can walk around Israel freely. And they can call themselves Bibi Productions, Netanyahu Productions, and work and provide. The law had to address not only Al Jazeera itself and shutting it down, but also making sure that any of these AP, Reuters, the news agencies, and also the satellite organizations, anybody providing them with material. If material from any organization is broadcast on Al Jazeera abroad, they will come under the scrutiny of the law here in Israel as well. They didn't address that. It's making it uncomfortable for Al Jazeera, but we know today that Iranian television, who don't need press credentials, have been working here in Israel for years as well. So I'm not too clear about that, but has to be very understanding for anybody in the Western world. Al Jazeera is not a media organization as we understand it in the West. And as we've seen since the war here, and I can tell you nothing in this war was surprising when it comes to media coverage, because even 20 years ago, AP, Reuters, CNN, BBC, all these organizations turned a blind eye to the fact that anybody employed by them, from the Palestinian Authority or in Gaza by the Hamas, and even in the Arab world, have to get the okay and have to be kosher in the eyes of those running the shows there, which are terrorists and ruthless, brutal Arab regimes. And they knew this. They ignored it. They say they uphold, their employees uphold all professional standards. Now we saw, if these are the professional standards of these organizations, like I said, they're moral bankruptcy.
Danny, thank you so much. I want to ask you one final question, and I didn't tell you ahead of time I'm going to ask you this question, so apologies, but I think it's an important one. One of the stated goals, or the stated goal of this war in Gaza, was to destroy Hamas. This many months in, do you think it's possible for Israel to actually succeed in destroying Hamas?
Is it possible? Of course it is. That said, there's a lot going on. Just like this whole conversation is about, has been about the restrictions we know and the tying of our hands and applying laws and things to Israel that are not applied to any place else and any other country in the world. The United States didn't have any restrictions when it fought against the ISIS and when it fought against the perpetrators of 9/11. The British, the French again, they're fighting for a good cause in Africa against the Islamic murderers of Christians in Africa. Surprisingly, Black Christians in Africa. Surprisingly, nobody in the universities in the West are fighting in their defense, and there a real genocide is happening. So if we are pressured, and this pressure can also be from elements within Israel, if they make the mistake for believing that for political reasons or political advantages, we have to stop the operation in some way and then they can go back to it, they are totally wrong. And not are they totally wrong, they will bring about the downfall of the state of Israel. We are not kidding or exaggerating when we're saying this is an existential moment for the state of Israel. And therefore, we have to annihilate and eliminate Hamas. Will it be immediately over? No, because they have a lot of access. We have to first close off the border with Rafah and the Philadelphia borderline there, across from Egypt. We have to understand that Egypt has been perpetrating and supporting the Hamas against Israel to have us into this war of attrition, to build themselves up. Now, I don't know if you've addressed this yet, but if you haven't, I will give you somebody who can talk about this. Egypt has been preparing itself for years now for a war against Israel, building up its infrastructure in the Sinai. If Israel is at peace with them, why are they doing it in the Sinai? Israel is the only only country that borders Egypt and the Sinai. So we have to question that as well. In the meantime, they were very much supportive of getting weapons, and everything you see right now with Hamas came in through and having the knowledge of the Egyptians. So we have to be there and stop that, and we have to continue our presence until such time as we weaken because once we leave, and we saw that, anything good came out of the last few months of us restraining ourselves has been precisely that when we left an area, Hamas went back in. And again, you have missiles in the direction of Sderot and in Ashkelon, and you have the population in the south of Israel being held hostage right now, as they have been for the past 20 years. So this is unacceptable, and therefore we have to go in, maintain a presence there, fight, and eradicate these elements that are encouraging the jihad against Israel.
Danny Seaman, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining the briefing today. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. And I'll let everyone know that if you're interested in Danny doing a private briefing for your community or coming to your community in person, reach out. Danny never disappoints the audiences, so we look forward to setting that up. And Danny, again, great to be with you, and I hope you'll join us again. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.